Vanakkam. Now we are going to have discussion on part 2 of compliance with technical, professional and ethical standard for practicing unit. What the reviewer has to follow. This is going to be another interesting session, and we are going to have discussion on technical standards and ethical standards in depth. Actually, this concept is being divided into 4 parts. One is accounting standards issued by ICA, framework issued by ICA, and it is what are the provisions applicable for various statutes or not, that we are going to have discussion. Now, we are going to have discussion on technical standards that every practicing unit has to follow. It is a duty of the peer reviewer to see whether the technical standards have been followed by the practicing unit or not. Attain the years of professional experience in practice. That is, it is a duty of the peer reviewer to get the experience of the practicing unit. What's the professional experience and in what field they are very expertise. That also you have to see. That is, understand the field of expertise of that practicing unit. Third one is whether the practicing unit complies with the accounting standards issued by ICA while performing the audit of the clients. So the peer reviewer has to see what are the accounting standards that are being issued by the ICA. So the peer reviewer should be a master of accounting standards issued by ICA, and whether the same accounting standards have been followed by all the practicing unit, and it is the duty of the peer reviewer to see whether those accounting standards have been followed by the ICA. This is also another technical standards. And fourth one is whether secretarial standards issued by ICSI, that is Institute of Company Secretaries of India, have been complied with whenever or wherever necessary. So the peer reviewer also, you should be a master in understanding the secretarial standards. So that means all the peer reviewers are asked or go through the secretarial standards issued by ICSI, that is Institute of Company Secretaries of India, provided the practicing unit is going to audit the companies. So the peer reviewer is going to verify the practicing unit, but if the practicing unit is auditing the companies, whether all the secretarial standards have been followed by that companies have been verified by the practicing unit, and all this have to be seen by the peer reviewer. And whether the framework for preparation for and presentation of financial statements are followed by the practicing unit. So how they are preparing the financial statements, how they present the financial statements are also to be reviewed by the peer reviewer. So what the practicing unit, they are following all the procedures to prepare the financial statements have to be considered, have to be reviewed by the practicing unit. And sixth one, whether standards on auditing, standards on assurance engagements, standards on quality control and guidance notes on related services have been complied with by the practicing unit. So this is also to be individually ascertained by the peer reviewer. So whether all the standards on auditing, which we have discussed so far, and standards on assurance engagement, standards on quality control, guidance notes have been followed. Point number 7, whether the relevant notification direction issued by ICA have been considered by the practicing unit. So what are the notifications? What are the directions that have been issued by the ICA? So the peer reviewer should also have got the list, and the practice unit, they are also supposed to have the list of notification directions, whether everything has been applied to the client by the practicing unit. So whether the same has been followed by the practicing unit or not, it is a duty of the peer reviewer to verify it. Whether the sample collected by the practicing unit are sufficient and appropriate, draw conclusions and provide an opinion. Normally, the practicing unit has to receive the questionnaire. From the questionnaire, they have to select the sample. Whether the sample selected by the practicing unit represents the entire client's base. Whether those selection is correct or not, that has to be reviewed, verified by the peer reviewer, and he has to give yes or no, and whether it's applicable or not, and with the remarks he has to give his report. So it is another duty of the peer reviewer to see whether the samples collected by the practicing unit are correct or not. Whether material facts are appropriately being disclosed by the practicing unit in case of audit claims. What are the important material points that a practicing unit has followed? Whether the same has been got from the audit lines. Everything has to be verified, has to be compiled by the practicing unit, and those details have to be verified by the peer reviewer. That is false. That is one of these technical standards. Whether working papers are properly maintained by practicing unit and process adopted for sharing the same with any external parties. So working paper maintenance, once again, they say that it is very, very important whether the practicing unit has maintained the working papers in a proper manner, whether they have got the proper file, whether they have got the permanent file, and if there is any scope for updation, everything has to be seen by the peer reviewer, and it is a duty of the practicing unit to maintain the working papers properly. And when they want to share the same thing with the external parties, what are the procedures they followed? That also to be verified by the peer reviewer. That is one of the technical standards. Whether going concern assumptions have been appropriately considered by the practice unit in case of engagements wherever relevant. Suppose if the unit with audit is going to be engaged by the practicing unit, the practicing unit has to consider the going concern concept. Whether the going concern concept is being considered by the practicing unit or is correctly done by or not, it has to be reviewed by the peer reviewer. This is a part of technical standards. Now we are moving to the ethical standards. So ethics, if there is any deviation, any violation of ethics, then all the chartered accountants are responsible or liable to face our insured's disciplinary action. So first, the peer reviewer must understand the qualification of the practicing unit. Whether it's in, that is, what are the qualifications, whether it's a chartered accountant, company secretary, what are the qualifications that practicing unit partner has got, or proprietor has got, that has to be properly understood by the peer reviewer. Then whether the internal policies and practice of the practicing unit adhere to the code of ethics issued by the ICA. So here there are two things. What is the policy of internal policies and procedures or practices by the practicing unit? It is not about the client. It is the internal policies and practices of the practicing unit. Whether the same is tallied, whether the same is adhered to the code of ethics issued by the ICA. That means there should not be any deviation from the guidelines issued by the ICA in code of ethics. And it has to be verified by the peer reviewer. And at time, the list of policies or safeguards followed by the practicing unit to protect themselves from the threat of independence. So audit is meant for independent. So the auditor, whenever they are giving report, it should be an independent report. There should not be any influence on it. What are the policies that the practicing unit has got? What is the safeguard that the practicing unit has followed? Everything has to be prepared in the form of list. The same list has to be handed over by the practicing unit to the reviewer, and the reviewer has to go through all this and he has to satisfy. And if there is any deviation or difference of opinion, that has to be reported by the peer reviewer. Next one with reference to ethical standard is what steps are followed by the practicing unit to comply with professional ethics such as integrity, confidentiality, objectivity. So these steps have to be clearly prepared by the practicing unit. The same thing. So we are integrity. Then it is the duty of the practice unit to prove that they have got the integrity. And what about the confidentiality? Whether they have to what extent they developed confidentiality among the client or among themselves. So everything has to be submitted by the practicing unit to the peer reviewer, and the peer reviewer has to verify. And whether practicing unit has any other business relationship with the client other than the ordinary business relationship. So ordinary business relationship is the profession. Suppose if the practicing unit partner, he may be a partner in the other business of the client. What is the relationship? So if there is any special business relationship, that has to be identified by the reviewer, and he has to give a specific point whether it is going to affect the independence or not. Suppose if he is a partner, definitely it will affect his profession. Then understand whether the practicing unit has been alleged with professional misconduct at any point of time in his professional career. So here, one thing is, if a peer reviewer is subject to any professional misconduct, even in the past, he is not eligible to be appointed as a peer reviewer. But if the practicing unit is subject to any professional misconduct, whether it has happened in the past, that has also to be disclosed. That has also to be verified by the peer reviewer, and he has to give a special report about this with reference to the ethical standards. Whether the practicing unit, point number 7, whether the practicing unit or his relative have any substantial interest in the audit clients or officers of such clients which affect the independence of the practitioner. It's very, very simple. If the practicing unit has got any substantial interest with the audit clients, so he may be a financial, or you would have borrowed some money, or he might have, they may be doing some other business. So that affects the independence. So the peer reviewer has to satisfy himself whether the practicing unit has got any substantial interest in the clients, in the audit clients. That has to be verified. That has to be confirmed by the peer reviewer. It's a very, very difficult for the peer reviewer, because he has to prove that the practicing unit has got this substantial interest, and determine whether any long-term association with any of the clients has been established which might pose a threat to its independence. Suppose if your client is there for 20 years, 25 years, sometimes if the client has committed any mistake, and it is very difficult for the auditor to give the report because of his long standing. So whether this type of long standing is going to affect the independence, that is also to be reported and reviewed by the peer reviewer. Instances wherein the practice unit has withdrawn from the engagement to protect independence. Sometimes the practicing unit say that no, we are not able to do the audit because we are very close, and if we give the report, it will affect independency of reporting. Then this has to be scrutinized by the peer reviewer. The simple concept is, if any audit engagement is withdrawn by the practicing unit, the reason for withdrawal reasons for withdrawal have to be verified by the peer reviewer. Whether the number of audit clients are within the limits specified by the Companies Act. So what is the total limit? Whether the audit engagement done by the practicing unit is the maximum limit that is being prescribed as per the Companies Act and as per the guidelines issued by the ICA. The rule now is, as per Companies Act of 2013, the maximum limit is 20. That is, which excludes 1% company, small company, dormant company, which is having a paid up share capital of less than 100 crores. And as per the ICA guidelines, it includes all. That is, you should not exceed 30. That is maximum number of 30 audits, which includes private company also. So the maximum ceiling has to, so that means the peer reviewer has to call for the total number of audits carried out by the practicing unit. What are the kinds of audits, whether it's a single company or 1% company or small company or dormant company, everything has to be called for and has to be verified by the peer reviewer. So he has to give a specific report saying that the limit has not crossed or has crossed. Next one is, in case of new client, ensure if no objection certificate has been obtained by the practicing unit from the outgoing auditor of such companies. That means if you are a new auditor, you have been appointed, whether this new auditor has obtained the no objection certificate from the existing auditor. That is a must. If no objection certificate has not been received, has not been obtained by the new auditor, then he is responsible. He has to face the consequences from our ICA before the disciplinary committee if any complaints goes. So understand the procedures followed while referring the assignments to external experts, because the auditor is not, is not very specialist in, it's not a specialist in all areas. So normally he has to depend on others. That means he has to give the work to the external experts. What are the procedures that the practice unit has followed, and what are the steps, or what are the practices that practice unit has followed to refer the matter to the external experts. So that has also to be verified by the peer reviewer. And check if the practice unit has accepted any audit assignment where there is wherein there was unjust removal of earlier auditor, or where the auditor fees was withheld by the company. There are two situations. They say that in case if the previous auditor has been removed from the audit due to some unjust manner, so without reasons they have been removed, or suppose if the auditor has given any qualified report and for that the company has removed the auditor, and that has to be accept, that is that this practice unit has to accept the audit only after probing or after getting all the clarification from the existing auditor. And in case the no fees has been paid by the company to the old auditor or existing, that is earlier auditor, then the reason for withholding the fees has to be scrutinized, has to be verified by the practice unit, and both the things have to be verified by the peer reviewer. And he has to give you a special recommendation. Check whether at any point of time whether the practicing unit has accepted the fee which is below minimum scale fees recommended by ICA. Suppose if the fees fixed by the ICA say 10,000, in case if the practicing unit has accepted the fees of 5,000, that is, this is called as undercutting of fees. Undercutting of fees is also liable to be referred as disciplinary grounds. So the peer reviewer has to see whether the fees fixed by the practicing unit is as per the fees, minimum fees fixed by the ICA or not. Then check if the practicing unit being a statutory audit has rendered any negative listed services provided under section 144 of the Companies Act of 2013 to any of its audit lines. That is, please refer section 144 of the Companies Act. If some of these services have been prohibited and these services have not been should not be done by the practicing unit, whether these services are, if those services have been performed by practicing unit, then the reviewer has to give a special report. What are the services that have not been considered or which have come in the negative list? That is accounting and bookkeeping services, internal audit, design and implementation of any financial information system, actuarial services, investment advisory services, investment banking services, rendering of outsourced financial services, management services, and any other kind of services as may be prescribed under the Companies Act of 2013 in future. So an auditor who has been appointed as the auditor of the company, and if the approval is done by the board of directors or by the audit committee, and the following the above said services of A to I should not be done by the practicing unit. If those services have been done by the practicing unit, then the peer reviewer has to give a special report for that. Provided that an auditor or audit firm or which have been performing any audit services on or before the commencement of this act shall comply with the provisions of this section before the closure of the first act. Okay, these are all the things that as per the section 144, the company company auditor, that is, if the practicing unit should not do the services which have been banned or which have been put in the negative list by section 144, and if the service, if there is any services rendered by 144 by the practice unit, those services have to be specifically reported by the peer reviewer in his report. And see in ethics. There is a website designing. There are rules and regulations based on which a practicing unit can own its website. What are the rules and regulations? Whether those rules and regulations have been followed properly by the practicing unit, and whether those website practicing unit is in line with the requirements of the institute guidelines or not, because it is one of the ethical violation if the website designs website is not according to the specifications given by the code of ethics. And 17, whether the practice unit is complying with the requirement of the quality review board. So what are the rules and regulations that quality review board they are issuing it, whether the same has been followed by the practice unit or not. The peer reviewer has to do the review based on this requirements. Then point number 18, the process and approach followed by the practicing unit in terms of the client approach to understand if any solicitation of work is involved. What are the process? Suppose if they want to do some work for the client, what are the process, what is the procedures, and how they approach the practicing, how they approach the client, and all these have to be properly recorded by the practice unit. Whenever the peer reviewer asks for the details, they have to submit these details to the peer reviewer, and peer reviewer, on going through it, he will give you a special report for this. Then understand whether proper care and due diligence has been exercised before performing any attestation services. Suppose if any attestation services, the rule, that is the code of ethics clearly say that a charter accountant should not sign the unaudited statements, should not sign the projection statements, should not sign the CME. So all this, suppose only when the audit is being carried out, the charter accountant has to give the attestation. Without that, without any powers, if he has done the attestation, then that is subject to code of ethics violation. So this point has to be reviewed by the peer reviewer. And in case any client has advanced money to the practicing unit, that is the borrower, any money is being given by the client to the practicing unit to be spent on their behalf. Why they are doing some advance? Because they ask the auditor to say that, sir, kindly take care of TDS payment, kindly pay advance tax on behalf of us. Whether the same has been remitted by the practicing unit to the government or not, this also has to be verified by the peer reviewer. Normally, the rule says you are not supposed to accept. You are supposed to accept only the client fees and not any other amount. That is the practice unit should not receive any money towards payment of TDS, towards payment of advance tax. It should not be accepted. This is also stated in the code of ethics, and this has to be specifically reviewed by the reviewer. Whether the practice unit is indebted to any of its clients, that is, if any loan is being borrowed from the client by the practice unit, that is, the amount is 1,000 rupees. That is also to be specifically given. That is, a declaration has to be received by the practicing unit. That is, the peer reviewer has to receive a declaration from the practice unit that they have not borrowed any amount from the client. How does practicing unit maintain confidentiality, safe custody, and retrievability of engaged document? Because all the confidential reports have been handed over by the client to the practicing unit, and the practicing unit have to keep all the documents intact. So they have to maintain the confidentiality. What are the procedures? What are the steps they are taking? How they are maintaining the confidence? How they are safeguarding the documents? Everything has to be properly documented, properly recorded by the practicing unit. Whenever peer reviewer comes and asks for the same, then the same has to be produced by the practicing unit to the peer reviewer based on the verification. Then peer reviewer, he will give his opinion. Then what are the measures and actions taken by the practice unit in case of conflict of interest, either within the partners or suppose if there is any conflict of interest, same, there should not be any conflict of interest between the partners and with the clients. If that is there, what are the measures that the practicing unit has got, and all these have to be produced to the peer reviewer for his reviewer. And in case of financial statements, in case the financial statement itself is being prepared by the practicing unit, this may lead to some self-review threat, because the practicing unit itself, they are preparing the statement. So definitely there will not be any self-review. So it's a threat to the self-review. So what are the steps that they have taken to remove this and obtain the measures undertaken to overcome the same? Whether there has been any acceptance of gift hospitality which leads to self-interest in the client. Suppose if the client is offering some gift to the practice unit, what are those gifts, and whether it is going to affect the independence? Everything has to be properly recorded by the practicing unit, and those types of gifts list have to be handed over to the practicing unit to the peer reviewer. So this is with reference to ethical standards. So far we have discussed technical standards and ethical standards, and this point of 25 with reference to ethicals and the point number 11 of technical standards will definitely be taken care of by the peer reviewer, and the peer reviewer has to give yes, no, or with the remarks. Why he say yes, why he say no, everything has to be given with the remarks. And with this, I am concluding the presentation of technical standards and ethical standards. And thank you very much for patient hearing and patiently watching this program. Nandri, Vanakkam.